All right, folks, we are live. We're live. This is Live with Sondra. And before we get started, I have a quick question. And that is, where do you think your biggest drop-off point is in your fan or guest checkout process? Is it pricing confusion, too many steps, lack of clarity, or maybe just a bad UX? Drop in the comments because today we're talking about just that. We're going to be unpacking that experience today with today's guest. So I'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to Live with Sondra. I guess I should have said I'll see you on the other side of the intro, but I think you guys know what I meant there. And before we bring in today's guest into our conversation, I want to thank our sponsor, Gatemaster Technology. At Gatemaster, we spend a lot of time thinking about the purchase journey and how quickly excitement can turn from hesitation if that experience is not seamless. Because ticketing isn't just about a transaction. It's about removing friction, creating clarity, building confidence in the decision to buy. When your ticketing payments and data are working together, you don't just complete a sale, you protect the guests or the fans' excitement and carry it all the way through to the experience. And that's exactly what today's conversation is about. Today's session is titled The Fan Journey, Ticketing Strategies to Loyalty. And I'm joined by Jenipher Kantor, founder of Jenipher Kantor Consulting, where she specializes in the intersection of ticketing, strategy, and fan experiences. Jenipher has built a career solving complex operational pain points for venues, global brands, and independent promoters. She's known for identifying friction in the purchase flow and turning it into long-term fan loyalty. And one of the things I love about Jenipher is her daily workouts are non-negotiable. You guys have heard me say that on here. I maybe don't do them daily. She's got that on me. But I can really appreciate that. And she says it keeps her energized, sharp, which honestly tracks when you're solving problems like she is at her level. Jenipher, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sondra. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to chat.
I'm excited to chat with you too. We actually met at Intix this year in Vegas.
That's true. Yep. I'm decided I'm just gonna pretend we're still at Intix. We're still in Vegas and chat away.
Well, because I think we actually shut it down. Like
That
they were
is
trying
true.
to kick us
I
out of
was
the.
supposed to go to a session or two, and I missed both of them because we were talking for so long. So no regrets.
I'm sorry you missed the session, but
No.
like
It's all
when you
good.
know you're having really good conversations, which is also why I was like, I think I need to have this person on the show.
Well, I appreciate that.
A good conversation. Well, Jenipher, before we jump into some of the questions that I have for you, I was just hoping maybe you would take a moment and tell us a little bit about how you got started in this industry. You know, what led you to this point where you are now helping these experiences?
Okay. Yeah. Honestly, I would never have thought that I would have gone down this road in terms of specifically sort of in the world of ticketing. But I was a theater major in high school and a theater major in college. And then I did some different internships, and I was trying to figure out how it is that I could stay within like the entertainment industry and have a career that was being a theater major. My concentration really was in acting, and I quickly figured out that I just was not interested in auditioning for the rest of my life. And so I wound up getting a job at Ticketmaster. That's kind of how it started. And again, this was so long ago that like it was actually an ad in the New York Times, and I faxed in my resume. And somebody that I wound up working with actually tells this story about how she found my fax like on the floor and picked it up and brought it into my then boss. And I had some experience working. Actually, I had interned at MTV, and so I had a little bit of experience that way. And I had some contract experience I had from working a different position. It just kind of came together. And so that's really where it started. I really had no idea about ticketing, or Ticketmaster for that matter. I kind of, learned on the job as far as that was concerned. And back then, the internet actually was brand new, or at least in the ticketing world. So like when I first started at Ticketmaster, like in terms of our goals, there was a goal that was like I-15, I think we started out, and the I was for the internet. And therefore, that was our goal, was to take the sales and move 15% of those sales over to online sales as opposed to
Wow.
outlets and the phones. Really, the phones was where most of the sales happened when I first started. Um, and so, and also because I worked in the New York office, I wound up with bigger clients than probably would. Sorry, my ears are coming out here. I wound up with bigger clients than maybe I would have had if I had been in a smaller market. But because I was in New York, I wound up with clients like Live Nation, for that matter. This was before the merger, and a lot of other sort of mid-level clients that I probably would not have had I been in a much smaller market. But because I was in New York, my general manager typically would deal with like MSG. So then I would deal with AEG, it was that kind of thing. And I really learned just sort of like, on the job, if you will. And then also back then, in terms of ticketing companies and options, there really weren't very many. So when it came to ticketing, if you were putting on an event, whether it was a very large scale event or a small event, you went to Ticketmaster. That's just kind of what you did. And so I wound up learning just across the board in terms of different types of clients. And that's really kind of where it started. And this was, God, I'm aging myself, but almost 25 years ago. So there you go. It's
Yeah.
obviously changed quite a bit since then, but that's where it all started.
Well, you're not aging yourself. I've been here almost 25 years. In attractions, I mean, an adjacent vertical with regards to ticketing. But yeah, no, I remember those old days. In fact, it was so funny. A friend of a colleague and friend of mine posted something today, because I started in ticketing, but in point of sale, where they were showing registers and how we evolved to systems.
Yeah.
And I look back and at the time I started, I was moving people from registers to systems. And that's so funny to me because I was also teaching many of these ticket operations how to use a mouse.
Yeah.
Some of them hadn't even touched a computer at that point. And today that I'm sure probably 100% of tickets on Ticketmaster are sold online.
I mean, I think it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Yes, at this point, but it took a while for it to migrate in that way. And I'm sure lots of people do remember, the idea of like going to an outlet, which meant just like a Sam Goody or that kind of situation, and like
Yeah.
getting a bracelet and waiting a line and doing all that. I mean, there was a very large outlet department at Ticketmaster at one time. So it definitely, has changed significantly.
Yeah, that's wild. This is such a fun conversation for me. So I kind of want to jump into into what you're doing and now, and how does high level ticketing strategies actually help shape the fans' emotional journey before they arrive at a venue?
Well, I think in general, it's the idea that the experience starts with the ticketing and really um, inflects the entire process until the fan or the customer actually gets to the event. So that like the first touch point they have really, I mean, typically you'll see marketing, but from there, that's the first touch point a client would have with their fan. And so it's really important that that goes as smoothly as possible, because the fan is going to already start to have excitement about the event. I mean, the emotional piece that people have when it comes to events, whether it's music or sports or whatever, um, they're very attached to that, and you'd be surprised about the level of emotion that comes with
Yeah.
going to an event. I mean, I've had people break down in front of me when things don't go well. And so, I mean, the reality is that the promoter or the venue or whoever's putting the event on, they actually have this, that what they want and what the guests want is actually one and the same, but you have to look at it from that perspective, from the perspective of the fan. And the other piece of this is education, right? So when I would work events, even in the last, I'd say like 7, 8 years, if you work an event and you happen to be at the box office, or you're actually going through and scanning that kind of thing, and if something happens with a customer and you ask them, how did they get their tickets? What do you think that the person says to you? Like the number one thing that someone will say to you if you
I,
ask them,
when
how
you
did you
ask me
get your tickets? What?
online,
Yes.
on my phone.
Like literally most people say I bought them online. At End of story. That's it.
Yeah.
They don't have anything else. They don't understand. Like they don't know where they purchase their tickets, and in terms of and how the back end of it works, and the idea that if they haven't purchased in a way that you would have access to then look at their purchase, that then you can't help them. And so that's really the reality of it. So the clear path that you can make for the customer, the better experience they have purchasing that ticket, the better experience they're going to have, and the way in which they're going to think about the event, about the artist, about the venue, about the all of those pieces of it are actually tied to that first touch point that they have. And I think in general, it tends to be ticketing is something that's kind of like an afterthought. It's like an assumption that you're going to have to obviously sell your tickets, but the idea that there's such an emotion tied to it, and there's such a process, I think, is something that gets lost a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how much you're bringing the emotion into the conversation about the ticketing experience, because I definitely agree. Like a lot of times, it's not just about the excitement with the who you're going to see. I just went and saw Miguel early last month, and I will admit, it was a little bit of a stressful buying experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we had to buy the tickets and you have to transfer it over to one of the apps, and you're worried that you're not going to get in, and even I would say, like, my husband bought those tickets for me, and I guess we had VIP tickets, but we didn't it wasn't clear, so we stood in the regular line the
And you were
whole.
in the wrong line. Yep. My sister
Yeah.
had an experience like that where she bought tickets and then she wasn't aware really of what she had bought, and then she wound up in the wrong line. And so all of those touch points are really important if you're on the other side of it when you're actually starting from the get go, right? So even just the way in which you're listing the event, are you making is where you're listing the event, does that make sense? And then is it then when you click, is it actually really obvious about like where the customer should go, and is that process easy, and is all of the information there up front? And then when you actually get to the venue, it's is the signage correct?
Right.
Is it's the entire experience from like start to finish. And ticketing is sort of aligned every stretch of the way, and the way in which you think about it from the beginning should like inflate that. You should have an idea as to where you're going from there.
Yeah, no, I love this because when you're dealing with the scale that you've dealt with these major venues, big artists, and all of that, it's fascinating to me because it is very difficult to communicate to those massive amounts of people and ensure that they're all having the same experience and that they're not having stress. Like I said, it was a little bit stressful, and then once we got in, it was like, oh yes, we're here. And I
Right, of
actually got
course.
introduced to a new artist who was opening, but because we were in the wrong line, we missed half of his performance. So
Right.
I would say that was disappointing. But I fell in love with the guy, like Shazammed him as soon as I get in there,
Right.
and I've been listening to him nonstop since. I can't even believe this person was opening for Miguel. He was so amazing. But Yeah, I know you touched a little bit about these friction points, but what is maybe the most common friction point that you see in the purchase flow that inadvertently kills fan loyalty?
I think it's just really the lack of communication and the lack of education are probably the two biggest points that sort of touched on
Yeah,
that a little bit. But if the fan is unclear about it, first of all, let's back up. So like the reality is, if the fan doesn't know about the event, then that's like obviously from the get go, then that's an issue, right? And
yeah,
honestly, most people don't realize that when it comes to events, that the biggest reason that a fan wouldn't be at an event is because they weren't aware the event was happening.
yeah.
That's like a stat, right? So it obviously starts with marketing the event appropriately, and where you think the fan will be, and sort of taking the data and doing the research and all of that, and then just making sure that the process of the fan knowing, like, if there's a pre-sale, which most of the time there is, right? So when the pre-sale is, and then like the timing for all that, all of the information, making sure it's really clear. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Just making sure all of those touch points are like on the ready, and that or organized, and that everyone has all of the correct information across the board. So that's the other thing. I think that because there's so many different touch points, like half the time there's like an agency involved, and then there's promoters involved, and then the marketing people, and sometimes if everyone isn't on this same page, it can get confusing as far as, and then eventually they'll get back to the fan in that way. So like every piece of it has to be, you know, the communication has to be there.
I can hear you perfect if you want to drop that one. As
Okay,
long as you
sorry.
can hear me.
I keep trying.
Right, listen, I have the weirdest ears. I can't wear earbuds to save my life.
I mean,
So,
well, I went and got these thinking, it would be better to have the wired, because that was what I was told. But
well,
anyway,
you sound
sorry.
great. You sound great, but I love what you're saying about, you have to have all that alignment with all the different parts that are working towards that fan experience and buying those tickets. And I agree with you. There was and I wish I could remember an old survey that was done on like satisfaction, that, and ultimately what it came back with was that it was communication of what they needed to do that had the greatest impact. So I think what a lot of people don't realize, and you can correct me because I think this is what you're saying, when you go all the way back to the marketing, is letting people know, one, that you're there, that this
Hmm.
event's gonna happen, but two, what they need to do in order to get the right tickets or get the right experience, purchase the right experience.
Yeah, like a clunky, confusing purchase path is just going to frustrate people.
Yeah,
And the reality is that half the time, even when it is someone who is educated and they do know that they're having a hard time with it, then that's like a bad sign. Now, sometimes in terms of if you're the promoter, if you're the person putting the event on, you don't always get to choose in terms of the ticketing platform. That's just kind of the way that goes.
sure,
But you can take each piece of it and try and make sure that in your marketing and what you're putting out, that you're being really clear in terms of what that purchase path will be. Because even if the event is for a different purpose than selling events, right? So even if it's there, I see all the time online where a creator will post something, and they're doing it, they're going to be at an event, and they're trying to sell tickets, even if the ticket isn't, it doesn't have an amount attached to it, but they'll link to the brand, literally just to
sure,
the page of the brand. Except for most people aren't going to understand like where to go to find events at the brand. Where is that? And it's like layered within their website, and then you're trying to find it and you can't find it, and eventually you just give up, right? So then, and then you wonder why maybe it wasn't as full as you wanted it to be. Those kinds of things. People are, they're not as, it's not as intuitive as people think that it could be, I guess, to some extent. So, and if I'm having a hard time finding your event, that's not a good sign,
yeah,
because I do know what to look for and
yeah.
I still can't figure it out. That's bad. So
I love that because I say that all the time because Gatemaster, we primarily work with water parks. I mean, we do a lot of different experiences within the attraction space, but we love our water parks. And one of the things that I laugh so, to your point, I will go and try to buy tickets on some of these park site. And I'm like, if I can't figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
that's a problem because I'm like an expert at this. Like I will find a way to buy a ticket, but if I can't figure it out, it's a real issue. So to your point, like if you can't figure out how to buy the ticket, but I think it's interesting when you mentioned influencers, when you look at some of these business influencers and how they sell their tickets, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't always have the greatest platforms, but if you notice, like they have these landing pages, like
Mm-hmm.
Gary Vee or Russell Brunson, even Grant Cardone, they have these big landing pages, and it's like buy your ticket in your face. And I wish that more venues thought about that.
Correct. Yeah. I think also it's like this idea that if it's a large artist that people are just going to automatically know, and some of that might be true, but you still want to make sure that you're taking care of that fan from the get-go through
Yeah.
the entire experience. So I feel like the reality is, like, if you're thinking about it from their perspective, right? Thinking about it from that fan's perspective as opposed to your business perspective, or the fans, or like the artist perspective or the promoter. It's like you're looking at it from the way in which the fan is looking at it. That'll give you the best idea about what that experience is going to truly be like, and making sure that it's representing that everyone correctly, right? You're representing, because it's an extension, right, of the artist. It's an extension of the promoter. It's an extension of the venue. And I think that if you look at it from that lens, then you're going to have a more successful event. And that's kind of how I got here, is this idea of like, okay, there's all of these different perspectives, and it's really important that you take a look at that, and you're looking at it, from out here, and in terms of like the outcome, and how that's going to inform the outcome, and how that's going to inform the way in which the fan or your customer is going to think about the venue, think about the artist. Because the reality, I mean, to some extent, yes, a fan is going to go where the artist is playing. That is true, but there are still different, there are different markets, and maybe they are picking between one or the other, and they had a better experience at one, they're going to go to that one. Um, and so it's making sure that each piece of it is really clear and it's a really positive experience, because that's the other thing, is that you want them to positively think about the artist, positively think about the venue, all of those
Yes.
pieces, and that it is important.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I mean, when I started with Gatemaster, one of my first gigs was, have you ever heard of the Vault 360? I don't know if it's still around, but it was an old concert hall and it was an old bank vault in Long Beach, California.
Oh, it sounds neat.
So I
No.
was in Southern California. It's a beautiful place, and they actually still had all the old bank vaults in the basement
Mm-hmm.
where the artist would be. So it was really fun. I did. We were a primary ticketing software for them, and got to do tickets for the Killers, Mary J. Blige, even Kanye. And what was always interesting to me back then is they would come to the venue and they would want to meet who was doing their tickets. I had
No,
to
that's
meet all these amazing artists because we were doing their tickets, and I know that it's so different today because the scale for those are, I mean, for some of these artists is insane. But to your point, they were asking to meet us because the ticketing experience did represent them,
yeah, for
and it was
sure.
important to them.
I mean, if you think that's so key that you understand that, it's just, and yes, there's different, different levels in terms of depending on the event, and how big the event is or how small it is, but you still want to make sure that your brand is consistent within that, because even larger artists will sometimes do underplays, and so they'll be at a venue that's maybe not as big, and you still
Yeah.
want them to have that same high level, high touch point experience. And the reality is that the ticketing experience, it does inform how they're going to feel. So if you've ever been to an event and somehow or another something didn't go right with your tickets for one reason or another, by the time you get in, you're already in not a great mindset. So it really does inform the experience that the fan has, and you want to just make sure that that experience is positive.
Yeah.
um, and the folks who are new to putting events on, I think in general, like there's like this lack of education in terms of understanding like the complexities of each piece of it. It's certainly like ticketing is, we used to have a boss who used to say that ticketing was, it wasn't rocket science, which it's not, obviously, and we're not saving lives and all of that. However, it is more complicated than most people know or understand in terms of the back end. But
Yes.
you're doing a good job when it looks easy, right? That's the point. I mean, I strive my entire career, I've always strived to make sure that it seems really easy and just like it happens like that, because that's what says you're doing a good job. But the reality on the back end is that it actually is complicated, and there are a lot of different moving parts. And if you're not aware of all of that, the experience for the fan can suffer.
Yeah. Well, especially today, when you look at all the third party outlets, the
Yeah.
OTAs, the what do they call it on the when you look at how complex some of that stuff is, right?
Yeah, well, all of the I mean, even when you go onto Ticketmaster, a lot of people say you're looking for for your pre-sale, if you will, and there's a list that's very long.
Yeah.
I
Right.
worked on that for a long time too. So it's the idea again of education and knowing what you're looking for and knowing the way in which you want to promote the event and knowing sort of the back end and what each operational piece should be when it comes to the ticketing piece of it, right? Like knowing all the questions to ask depending on where you live, like within that ecosystem, depending if you're new and you're putting on an event and you're dealing with the venue, or you're dealing with the promoter, or maybe the promoter's new. It just kind of depends on who you're talking to. But it's the idea of knowing what questions to ask, and understanding what, when you get that answer, what that then infers, like what that then pushes you towards, or the next question you should ask, and just having that education really.
Well, so now you kind of got me thinking about pricing and, understanding how can a venue use its pricing? Because I know this is something you can help people with to structure or tell a story rather than just as a way to cover overhead and sell tickets. What does that look like?
Well, I mean, to some extent, the ticketing isn't, or the ticket, the pricing for the tickets isn't necessarily always going to be something that the venue can dictate. It kind of depends on what the event is and where that started from. However, I think that one of the things that is not always talked about from a pricing standpoint is the idea of what can you offer the fan that they couldn't necessarily buy, period, right? So I think the idea of thinking about the pricing from the fan standpoint and making sure that you're taking all of that into consideration. So maybe the pricing has to be at X, right? For you to be able to pay everyone you have to pay and all of that. But maybe you can add something on. Maybe you can offer something that they couldn't otherwise get. Maybe you can, work with another brand to try and entice in that way. Just being sort of creative about it, and the other piece of this I think that's really important is transparency, right? There's like lots of talk about that in the press, and if you look online, and there's always a fine line, obviously, between not giving information and not giving too much, but you want people to make sure that they feel like they're being as transparent as you can, and that you're upfront with what the pricing is, and it's very obvious to the fan before they're purchasing, right? So I mean, and there's lots of discussion about having service charges on the inside or the outside, and sort of, but I think a lot of it really comes back to education, right? And making sure that the fan understands what it is that they're getting, why it's sort of priced in the way in which it is, and making sure that they're not feeling like they're getting sort of duped in that way, right? So it really comes out making sure that the visibility is there, the education is there, and then the fan can make their own decision as to like what their threshold is. But I think it's when the fan feels like they didn't know everything up front, that's when I think that the fan gets frustrated. And there are ways of sort of talking. That's the other thing, is the way in which you talk about it, right? The way in which you're actually, what you're putting in online or in the press, and how you're announcing, and all of that. So.
Yeah, no. I'm a big advocate for communication, right? And especially when it comes to pricing, I love that you mentioned transparency. To me, that's a big one for me. Even in our segment of of ticketing, transparency for the guest is super important, or the fans is super important. And I'm curious because you mentioned earlier about being in theater, and I think I knew that about you. I can't remember if that's actually how we got talking. I don't know if I mentioned to you my kids are all stage actors,
No, I
and
don't think you told me.
yeah, my daughter, actually, I'm going to be spending the weekend volunteering in the ticketing booth.
Oh, really?
A show that's taking place this week in Denver. And
Very good.
my husband and my sister, who's one of my business partners, they always laugh and go, "Do they know who they have in their ticket booth right
Right.
now?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm just happy to be here, because it's kids shows, and
Yeah.
I'm on a volunteer committee, so
Right. I
if
think it's also really good to always make sure that you've worked in every piece, right? It's like the
yes,
idea of working in the box office, working production. I've done a little bit of that, myself also, just being like, so you sort of have an understanding across the board about how each piece of it and what it takes to get it done and all of that.
yeah. Well, and even for me, it's fascinating because my day-to-day work is in attractions. So a
Hmm.
very different experience than that of a theater. And it's fascinating. I mean, I have a blast every single time. It's good for me. We have a lot of conversations on here about how managers need to go into their venues and
Hmm.
into the and see what's happening in order to get a real view of what's happening. So for me, it's one of those moments where I'm going into a venue and seeing how is this actually working. So I love that. But that kind of brings me to this idea of some of these venues that might feel stuck, right? And what is the first operational hurdle that you usually have to clear to get them back on track? Like, what is something that, uh, and maybe how do they even recognize that they're stuck?
I think really, again, it comes back to the fan and making sure that you're looking at what's important to your customer, right? So like some things you can get sort of bogged down in like the day-to-day pieces of it. If you kind of like back it out and start thinking about it, if you were like to start from scratch, for example, like what would be really important? What would the goals be
Sure.
in terms of making sure that the fan has a positive experience, just, from the get-go, and maybe take a look at the things that, if you go through like your complaints or what have you, like what is the number one thing that your customer has feedback on, right? And looking at that and just trying to start like, just from the basics, and look and see how you can make changes there. Really, because if you go to your data, usually the improvements you need to make usually are there. You can kind of like get an idea to like where, maybe where you're faltering, or where the fan is having like, you know a bad experience, or you're missing the mark a little bit, that kind of thing, and sort of like starting from scratch and looking at it at what your goals can be based off of that.
Yeah, I think looking at that feedback is gold, right? Because you
Hmm.
can learn a lot about the fans' experience just from looking at that. But I'm curious too, with regards to like this stuck, or maybe your approach, how does it change? That I'm going to be working in a very small little ticket booth in Aurora, Colorado, right? And so I know that when we're talking about a global brand versus a small niche, maybe creator or venue, how does the approach change, or is it the same?
Well, I think in general, like, depending on like the size of the venue, that obviously that makes a difference. And then, if we're talking about events that are happening like all over the world, that's going to be very different also.
Sure.
Um, Ticketing, from a ticketing perspective, ticketing in general globally operates very differently, in sort of in every country, but specifically like the US comparative, like for Europe, for example, the way in which they distribute the tickets is very different. So the way in which you're going to go to market is very different. There's an exclusivity 99% of the time in the US when it comes to the ticketing platform, and the availability of changing that, like usually not. Whereas in Europe, you can kind of take the house and kind of chop it up and give inventory to various different outlets. It's just it's set up differently. So the
Yeah.
plan you're going to have obviously is going to be very different. But from a customer perspective and the way in which you think about the ticketing and how it is you want to go to market and how you want to talk to your fan, or your customer, that part of it it should be consistent sort of across the board, right? Because you want the fan in Australia to have the same experience as the fan in Seattle or whatever. So therefore, I think it's really important to make sure that you're speaking in the same manner and that the experience is the same, even if the ticketing itself, like the actual platform or the way in which that operational piece is different. Um, but across the board, it's really important that everyone has a very similar experience, so that that part of it, you control the pieces of it that you can control. And in terms of larger events comparative, to smaller events, I think it's more about like the view that you have. Like if it, the 1,000 foot view for a large scale like market event, or if you're like able to sort of drill down with a smaller event and make it special in that way. So it really kind of depends on what your goals are, and how many how much how many people are going to be at the event, and then how much control you have over each piece of it. But from a ticketing perspective, it's just really important that there's consistency, communication, transparency. Kind of those same things are important, whether it's a lot of people or if it's a smaller amount of people, because you want to make sure, again, it's that person. It's what's most important to that one single fan and the way in which they think about it. And I think most artists would say that, most venue, I think, like across the board, if you were to ask, that would be the answer, right? They want that experience to be the best it could be.
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, hey, I know we're coming close on time, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about this idea of starting a business because I know that I think that's actually what we started talking about
Yeah, I think
was
so.
business ownership and how there really is no blueprint on how to do this. And what's would you say has been the most surprising lesson maybe that you've learned from this industry or from business? I would say I'm open to either. While building your own firm.
I think the thing that's most surprising is the thing that's the hardest piece of it is actually also what kind of I feel like sets me apart. And that's just the idea that when it comes to ticketing, for anyone looking at anyone new to it, right? If we're talking about like content creators or smaller promoters or venues just starting out, and the idea of not having that information and not necessarily understanding how ticketing works, and the importance of it and all the different connections, and how how important marketing is, and a through line through the entire experience, and having that understanding from different viewpoints, right? So I think part of what makes my experience unique is that I've worked with promoters, I've worked for ticketing, the largest ticketing company for that matter, at least at one time, and as well as working with large brands, and so, and each viewpoint has in, has sort of changed the way in which I think about the business as a whole and how it relates to ticketing and how it relates to the fan. And being able to come at it from all of those different viewpoints is what makes me unique, in that I'm looking to have to create an agency that's specific to how to put events on, really concentrating on the ticketing piece of it and how it relates to all the other pieces of it. The the marketing and the start, for that matter, search engine marketing, which we didn't really touch on, which is also super important. Most people don't realize that, like, then that goes back to the education, right? So
Yeah.
if you're to look for an event, no matter what it is, I don't care if it's Bruce Springsteen, I don't care if it's, Care Bear, like whatever it is, if you were to go on to any search engine and look for that event, the first at least 5 or 6 listings are not going to be the primary, or the venue, or the art. They're not going to go to the landing page you want them to. So it's really important. Again, it comes back to understanding how all of that informs your event and how you move forward in the decisions that you make. And so even though the idea of like an agency about ticketing doesn't exist today, and that's what I'm trying to create, and so therefore that's what makes it difficult, because there is no blueprint and it doesn't exist already. But I
Yeah.
think it's also what makes it important, and what makes it unique, and sort of showcases what I have to offer. So I'm kind of dealing with those dualities, if you will.
No, I think that's wise because I would say, and I mean, I'm not even in concert ticketing. We do some festivals and things like that, but the number one question I get asked from people who are not in ticketing
Hmm.
is that, why do I see, the 5 different ticket
Right.
networks
Well,
before I see the ticket and all those
I
things? And
could
I know that
spend
that is a
3 hours
big,
just talking
yeah,
about that.
we're gonna have to we're gonna have to schedule another conversation about that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that the customers, the fans, the guests, they're seeing this and they're seeing it is causing some confusion to some extent, but at the same time, it's marketing, right? It's getting exposure to the events, and like you said, it's a very big conversation that we should have
Yes.
started. If we are going to do it, but that's a major differentiator for you as a business and somebody who can help these venues or anyone doing these experiences create that kind of clarity amongst all of that.
Yeah, it's just really, I think the idea of starting with the or including the ticketing sort of alongside everything else.
Yeah.
I worked for an agency, and one of the things we used to talk about was the idea that you'd have a client, and the client they'd be willing to spend like exorbitant amounts of money on like this shiny thing in the corner, but the idea of like how the event was going to actually operate, and the ticketing piece in terms of getting all of the fans and the customers to the event, it's like kind of like a side thought. It's like
Yeah.
it should really needs to be thought about from the get-go with everything else. It's all important,
Yes.
but the ticketing has always sort of been something that was like a given kind of thing.
Yeah.
And really, it informs so much more than that, and that's where we're trying to go.
Yeah. No, I agree. I love this business that you have and what you're doing, and for so many reasons. Because even like I said, in water parks, oftentimes we're dealing with operators who are not experts in ticketing. They're not
Hmm.
marketing experts. They're not sales experts. There are people who are running these parks and they just want to give the best experience possible. As you mentioned, that's the goal, right?
Exactly.
And I'm sure that you are encountering so many people who just need that information that you have to help them create a better experience for that. So, with that being said, before I let you go, if somebody would like to get a hold of you or somebody needs your expertise, what's the best way for them to reach you?
I actually do have a website, jenipherconsulting.com. So you could head over there, and there's just like a little form, and just to reach out and sort of talk about like what your goals are, what your needs are. And if not, it's just my emails, Jenipher Kantor Consulting.com, and LinkedIn, sort of all the places.
Yeah, we'll make sure to post all those for you too
All
so they
right,
know
thank
how to
you. I
find it.
really appreciate it. I love I love our talking to you and our conversation. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate you. I love talking ticketing, and I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated about you was, it's not often I get to have that conversation. It's kind of a niche that most people don't understand. At
That
least day-to-day life. I can't walk out of the office here and go have conversations about these things. And I think that's why that conversation in Ticks was so fun to have with
yes,
you. And I was really excited to have you on the show. So thank you so much for being here. And I think this, like I said, is such an important conversation. And ticketing is one of the most underestimated parts of the fan experience, but it is where loyalty is built or lost.
correct. Yes, For sure.
Yeah. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
I'll see you real soon.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Bye, Jenipher. So, what I really love about this conversation is how clearly it shows how small moments of friction in the purchase journey can have a massive impact on long term revenue and the fan relationship or the guest relationship. Because I think, listen, I've been in ticketing for so long. Everybody always tells me, "Oh, you don't know ticketing in this industry. You don't know ticketing in that industry." But listen, the purchase path experience is very similar across all of them, with some small variances. So I know that like it is a massively important part of the buyer's or guest's journey and how they're going to experience what they're about to experience. So really, once again, thank you to Jenipher for sharing her expertise. I also want to thank our sponsor, Gatemaster Technology, for supporting this conversation and for continuing to push the industry towards more seamless, fan first ticketing and commerce experiences. And before I let you go, we're going to be taking a short break over the next 2 weeks, but you can still catch me out in the industry. I'm actually headed to the Sea Trade Cruise Global 2026 in Miami Beach, happening April 13th through the 16th at the Miami Beach Convention Center. And then I'm headed straight to the IAPA Summit Cruise 2026, taking place April 20th through the 24th. So if you're going to be at either of those, I would absolutely love to connect with you. And, let's have coffee. Let's just chat. I want to just see you. I want to know you. And I want to hear your thoughts. And I especially want to thank, again, my team. I don't thank them often enough, but at least I get to thank them publicly because it does take a lot of people to put this together and bring this programming to you. So I really want to thank them today. I want to thank everybody who is joining us live on replay, hashtag replay, if you're watching this on replay, so we know you were here, and to our podcast audience. We keep track of you too, and we appreciate your support. This is Live with Sondra, and we will see you soon.